All right, welcome everyone. I hope everyone's here. I can't see how many participants are here now, but I'm just going to take it on faith. This is the fourth and final workshop for predictive intelligence and pandemic prevention. We call ourselves Human PIP. We're focused on the social elements of pandemic prediction, control, and prevention. We've got a great lineup for the next 2 days. Really looking forward to it. My name is Jamie Jones. I'm one of the co-organizers, and I am just here to welcome you. Thank you for attending. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, who's going to lay out some of the technical and logistical details, and then we'll have a series of introductions. We'll introduce the team, and then we'll jump right into our first panel in whatever that is, a half hour or so. So why don't I turn it over to John, who will be our moderator.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everybody. I am John Fitch, and I'm here to just provide a little bit of context. And I tried to come up with a fun analogy this morning. Couldn't have too creative of one, but this is our main Zoom. Think of this as the conference center. Reminding ourselves back to the days of going to conferences. This is where we're going to take in a lot of content with some great panels and some discussions and some presentations. That's the main building. There's going to be another Zoom link, which we will share with you later. That's like an adjacent building to the conference center, where we will be doing breakout activities. We will have a facilitator for each breakout group. And all you have to do is just show up with your notes and anything that was really interesting during some of the presentations. And I'll be providing that Zoom link later on. Those breakout groups will be recorded, the sessions, the ideation sessions, where you're going to be in a group with some other people. Each round is going to be random. So that's a lot of fun in terms of networking, but you'll have a facilitator guiding you through a number of activities that are more or less a debrief of that one topic that we just would have gone through. We have 2 of those today and then 2 of those tomorrow. So again, there will be 2 separate Zoom links. We will make sure that you get the other Zoom link. Congratulations, you are now in the main one, but there will be a secondary one, and you'll be jumping back and forth, and we will guide you through that process. Other than that, in the breakout groups, we welcome all ideation. We have some great prompts, and all of your ideas will be in service of this ongoing initiative and research. So make sure you pay attention during these topics. We'll be leveraging your insights in the breakout groups. Wonderful. And again, recommend you stay muted unless you're speaking, panelist, just for attention management. And other than that, I think we have a video prepared for you.
Thank you, John. Okay, thanks.
Welcome to all of you. It's an honor to be the 15th Director of Nsf. This is a thrilling time to step into this role. It's a time of challenges that we are all navigating, but it is also a time of opportunities where we can look ahead to great things to come in discovery and innovation. One such area where we can see the possibility for great things is in the enhancing our ability to predict and respond to pandemics and emerging pathogens. It is this prospect that has encouraged NSF's investments in the workshop and in our larger Predictive Intelligence for Pandemic Prevention, or the PIP initiative. Thank you for joining us today as part of that effort. Obviously, the current COVID-19 pandemic is one driver for our engagement in the PIP effort, but it is not the only one. Our planet is becoming increasingly crowded and highly connected increasing the threat of emerging pathogens as well as infectious diseases. This demands a change in our concept of such epidemics and ultimately our approach to public health. The potential exists to move forward towards building a world free from the threat of infectious disease outbreaks and global pandemics and the associated mass casualties and large-scale economic disruption they cause. Such a future will necessarily rely on our ability to predict future outbreaks in an integrated system of rapid detection, analysis, modeling, and countermeasures. What steps can and should we take now that we would allow as a society to be more effective at intelligently predicting future disease outbreaks? How can we be more effective at introducing real-time interventions that help contain outbreaks in order to prevent large numbers of deaths and economic hazards? SARS-CoV-2, like SARS, MERS, Ebola, and Zika epidemics, did not arise from within the human population, and addressing these threats as well as others effectively goes far beyond the traditional boundaries of human medicine. While we cannot prevent pathogen emergence and the risk to humans, we can envision having better capacity for targeted monitoring and rapid detection. Such capacity could enable us to deploy targeted responses in a way that decreases the probability of experiencing future global pandemics. To build this capacity, we must develop an effective intelligence system for emerging infectious diseases that leverages past NSF investments and recent advances in a variety of crucial disciplines. This includes the various omics areas, synthetic biology, structural and computational biology, and host pathogen dynamics. We will also need to leverage network remote sensing, including the Internet of Things, data integration and analytics, artificial intelligence and machine learning, predictive modeling, as well as the social and behavioral sciences. In order to be successful in this endeavor, we must harness fundamental science discoveries that are integrated across this broad set of disciplines, an interdisciplinary effort, and train a robust cross-disciplinary workforce. This ambitious effort will require an approach built on partnerships and collaboration, bringing these fields together to push forward at the points of convergence. As I have said, when explaining the value of partnerships to my overall vision of NSF, partnerships are a methodology for strengthening, scaling, and speeding our advancements into the future. They are like the turbocharging engine of the research enterprise. Our vision beyond COVID couples lessons learned in response to the current COVID-19 pandemic with a powerful long-term proactive view of the benefits that can be achieved through the marriage of basic science and public health challenges. The goal is to transform society's ability to detect outbreaks early and respond quickly to limit transmission before an epidemic, let alone a pandemic, can occur. 4 workshops, including this one, are taking place this spring. They will bring together specialists who are advancing our capacity for rapid pathogen detection, biosensing, and tracking of human and non-human populations for the purpose of risk modeling and pandemic preparedness. These individuals will come from every sector: academia, government, industry, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Each workshop will include biological, engineering, mathematical, and statistical developments, as well as those in the computational, informational, and social and behavioral sciences. They will also highlight novel technological advancements and innovations in forecasting, tracking, and responding to the spread of infectious diseases. In addition to highlighting critical work in these areas, the goal of this workshop series is to connect communities of scientists like yourselves, across disciplines and across institutions to identify grand challenges in the area of pandemic preparedness intelligence. These workshops also present the community with an opportunity to engage in team building and networking, creating those vital turbocharging partnerships. In addition, the workshops offer an opportunity to outline next steps, which can be executed immediately in addressing the grand challenge we are facing. This series is just a part of NSF's overall effort to prepare our nation and our society to identify and respond to future pandemics. We at NSF are looking to you to understand the interdisciplinary research, as well as training opportunities in pandemic and predictive intelligence. These workshops present an opportunity for us to hear from the community as to the state of cutting-edge research, as well as existing research gaps that need to be addressed. This will enable targeted investments and collaborations, both domestically as well as internationally. We look forward to taking the discussions and outputs of these workshops and imagining how we can support vibrant efforts in this space well into the future. I thank you for your interest in this important goal, as well as your engagement in this very important workshop. I'm proud to lead an agency dedicated to solving society's issues, including increasing the prevalence of pathogens and the threat they present to our health and economy. You can be rest assured that NSF is here to lead the community in this endeavor and support you, the community, in advancing our capacity for intelligent prediction for pandemic preparedness. I want to take this opportunity to thank the PIP working group and the organizers for their efforts in creating today's workshop. I invite all attendees to collaborate with your peers, build partnerships, and set to work on this very important work. Thank you all.
All right, great. So let me
Cool. I'm in a meeting, but I may come.
I'm sorry, Rebecca. You're next.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Good morning. As you heard from the director, this is the fourth and final NSF Predictive Intelligence for Pandemic Prevention, or PIP for short, virtual workshop. I'm Rebecca Farrell, a program director in NSF's Directorate for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. On behalf of the entire NSF working group on PIP initiatives, I want to warmly welcome you. The internal working group includes program directors from the Directorates for Engineering, Biological Sciences, Computer Information Science and Engineering, and Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, and also the Office of International Science and Engineering at NSF. For the sake of time, I won't read each of their names, but as you can see, we represent a diverse group of research areas, and we work to ensure that this is an inclusive and collaborative effort. Our mission is to bring the research community together to address this specific grand challenge, which impacts us as individuals and communities, nationally and globally. The NSF PIP team has been working very hard over the past few months to help outline an NSF plan to mobilize the research community and to further cross-disciplinary collaborations for tackling future pandemics. Today's meeting organizers, Drs. Jamie Jones, Maya Trotz, Juliet Llewellyn-Moore, and Vivek Singh, who themselves come from a broad spectrum of disciplines, have put together an exciting series of talks and breakout sessions and an outstanding list of invited speakers and panel participants. Their names are shown on the website, humanpip.org, and the agenda, and you'll hear from them throughout the workshop. We look forward to hearing your ideas, your ongoing research in this area, and also any research gaps you see that should be addressed to stop future pandemics. As you just heard from the Director of Nsf, Dr. Sethuraman Panchanathan, NSF is dedicated to continuing investments in fundamental science relevant to pandemic research. Our goal is for these 4 workshops to discuss big questions. What advances in fundamental sciences are needed? What data should be collected and how should it be collected? How can new computer and trustworthy AI systems be developed and applied to such data? How should such research drive innovations in smart technologies? And what is the role of human behavior in pandemics and pandemic research? We at NSF are also dedicated to training a cross-disciplinary diverse workforce, and we encourage partnerships with other relevant entities. Our workshop for the next 2 days will be focusing on the human component of pandemics and pandemic research. I think it is fitting for the 4th and final workshop to be focused on the human component because human behavior touches on virtually every aspect of pandemics and pandemic research, as we've already heard across discussions in the first 3 workshops. Human behavior is, of course, central to disease dynamics and reactions and responses to pandemics. But fundamental research on humans and human behavior also can inform the research questions we ask, the research designs we develop, the data we collect, the tools we develop and implement, and the overall strategies we use for tackling pandemics. Again, welcome on behalf of NSF, and we look forward to an engaging discussion today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, now it's my turn. Sorry about that. Let me share my screen. Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here. As Rebecca mentioned, we're the final PIP program, and we are focused on human behavior and social behavior. This has been quite a year for all of us. We've experienced a largely, at least in our lifetimes, an unprecedented disruption of the social world. We've learned a lot more about Zoom than we probably ever anticipated knowing about. And we're beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel, which is nice. Many of us have probably had 1 or more of our vaccines so far, and we can see that maybe by the summer, things will begin to approach something more normal. I want to just lay out a couple of my observations about the nature of the social sciences, behavioral sciences, and their relationship to pandemic prediction, prevention, and control. And then I will give you a broad overview of what our program looks like. So I'm going to start with my first point, which is that every transmission event has a social cause, right? And it's so fundamental that it's actually embedded within the mathematical formulas that we use to model infectious diseases, right? That there's every transmission event requires that an infectious individual be brought together with a susceptible individual, and there's some sort of social interaction that leads to transmission. That doesn't actually have to be a direct transmission event, as we see in a respiratory infection such as the SARS coronavirus 2. It could be displaced in time and space depending on the nature of the transmission. But there is an underlying social behavior that leads to the co-occurrence of an infectious and a susceptible individual in the appropriate way. And I think that this is really fundamental, and it's often kind of forgotten that there's actually a model of social behavior that underlies even the most basic epidemic model that we use to understand epidemics, to forecast them, to predict them, to develop control strategies. And a big frontier is developing better sort of models of social interaction to drive our tools, our mathematical and modeling tools. A lot of progress has been made on this. It's slightly frustrating for those of us who are in the social sciences and are interested in these sorts of things, how it feels like we have to rediscover them repeatedly. And hopefully through our efforts, we can begin to, continue to integrate this a little better. My next point is that heterogeneity drives epidemics. And I had a bunch of technical slides that I'm sparing you, mostly in the interest of time, not because I took pity on you. But we can show that the epidemic threshold is lower in a heterogeneous population than it is in a homogeneous population, where the means are held the same. Heterogeneity is really important for the control of infectious disease. We can actually exploit heterogeneity to more rapidly drive an infection down to zero. And really importantly, right, heterogeneity drives epidemics, and it's important for epidemic control. And that's what social scientists measure. Social scientists measure social heterogeneity. And so the incorporation of the social sciences and the social science methodology for measuring social behavioral heterogeneity is absolutely fundamental for understanding the optimal tools for control and for prediction and for prevention. This is super important. My last big point from the social sciences is that I don't think that big data are going to save us. And I don't mean to say that I'm anti-data in any ways, I'm very pro-data. But I think that big data won't save us, but I think that big theory might. And this is an aspect that I've found interesting about all the discussion of research around pandemic control and prevention, is that there's lots of interest in the data and in using new tools from AI and machine learning and these incredible technological advances. We seem to lose our interest in doing science when it comes to understanding these things like, the social behavior that puts people in contact with infectious individuals, with the heterogeneity that drives the epidemics and that can allow us leverage for reducing epidemics. And so I'm not quite sure what it is. There's sort of this idea that we can make, individual simulation models, agent-based models, and we'll just throw everything in and that'll take care of the social behavior. That isn't the way science works. We know that in the physical sciences and the biological sciences. It's not true in the social sciences either. We need to integrate theory with data. We need to get in a hypothesis testing mode, and we need to integrate our social theory better with our models of pandemic prediction and control. So those are my 3 big points. Now for just an overview of what our schedule holds for us. We're going to have 4 thematic sessions, panels, throughout the next 2 days. This morning, we're going to talk about cultural transmission, identity, and groups. They're really interesting ideas about how we can speed information through networks, how identities and groups cause interesting dynamics and feedbacks in these epidemic models. I'm really excited. I'll be leading that session. Later this afternoon, we'll have a session on equity, access, and community engagement, led by Maya. A ton of work going on here and really interesting, and lots of really troubling empirical results, but reason for optimism for the sorts of engagements that we have with communities. Tomorrow, Vivek will lead a session on information communication and misinformation. I've been blown away by the degree to which misinformation is propagated throughout this epidemic, and this is clearly an issue that we have to take care of for the future. And then Juliet will finish up with a session on sustainability, longevity, and institutional memory, right? This is about how do we retain the lessons that we've learned from the present pandemic. I just want to give a quick shout out to my co-organizers, Vivek, Maya, and Juliet. This has been an incredible pleasure to work with all of you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the workshop holds for us. So let me, I believe I now have to show the next slide. We're going to move into our first session. Cultural transmission, identity, and groups, starting, I'm sorry. I actually, let me go back. I keep doing this. I'm going to turn it over to my co-organizers here for a quick introduction on their part. Sorry, guys. Someone want to step up? Vivek, you want to go first?
All right, sure. Hello, everyone. Let me also join in welcoming all of you. We look forward to an exciting two-day event. So many of you are here, all experts in the field, and we hope to bring together this expertise and really find ways in which we can work towards finding the right kind of solutions to prevent or better manage pandemics as they occur. We would be looking at an exciting session tomorrow. It would be on information, communication, and misinformation, which has multiple variants of information technology, how information is created, and how we can maximize the good in that process and minimize the harm. So I look forward to all that discussion and welcome everyone.
I could go next. So greetings and welcome to you all. And we hope that this NSF Human PIP workshop, so we'll use hashtag HumanPIPP. We hope that it provides a space that emphasizes the importance of the human component in all that we do as scientists and as engineers. And I'm truly honored to co-host this with Jamie, Vivek, and Juliet. And I look forward to moderating a session this afternoon at 1:45 p.m. Equity, access, and community engagement. I'll hand it over to Juliet now.
Thanks, Maya. A little over a year ago today, Jasmine Deskin died. I'm the first African-American woman to have died of COVID in St. Louis City. So today is her anniversary. And it's timely in that here we are a year later, and there are many folks that know many people who have died. And so our task is to basically remember the lessons, remember the stories of people like Jazz, remember all the people that have been lost as a result of the pandemic, but also remember the behaviors that occurred during the pandemic in preparation for the future. So I look forward to chairing the session on sustainability. How do we keep the memories? And it's been an honor and a great pleasure of mine to work with you, James, and Vivek and Meyer to put this whole thing together. And we look forward to your feedback on ways we can work with NSF to ensure that the memories of pandemics are never forgotten. Thank you.
We are 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Let's plow on. And we will move to the first session on cultural transmission, identity, and groups. We've got a great lineup of speakers today. So just as a quick overview, it's 11:30. It's hard for me to get the times right because it's 8:30 for me. But 11:30 to 12:15, we'll have our first session. We'll have 4 brief talks. We have an anchor talk, which we had pre-recorded. And then our anchor speakers will then provide a quick overview of their recorded talks. And then we have 3 panelists who will give introductory comments. We then have a targeted question answer, and then we move into a broader question answer. We'll then have a quick break, a half-hour break at 12:30, and then move into our breakout sessions where we'll discuss the material of the morning. So our 4 panelists for the first session on cultural transmission, identity, and groups I'm really thrilled to have all 4 of them here. Daniel Nettle is a professor of behavioral sciences at the University of Newcastle in the UK. Otakwe Conroy Ben is in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State University. Yewande Olayende is at the Center for Medicaid and Medicare. And Kathleen Carley is in computer science, engineering, and public policy, and a number of other affiliations that we couldn't fit on the slide at Carnegie Mellon University. Really leading people in the field. I'm thrilled to have them present. And so I'm going to exit my screen share and turn the floor over to you, Daniel, to do your recap.
Hello, everybody. I hope that you can all hear me. It's always weird just talk. Yeah, thanks. Thumbs up. Talking into a disembodied screen to people who may or may not exist thousands of miles away, but it's all something we've got used to. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm not going to recap my whole talk at any great length, but I just want to draw out the key points I make. I fear that they don't have much to do with identity or groups, but maybe we can find the links anyway. So the first couple of points I want to make really echo things that Jamie's already said in his introduction. The course of a pandemic and also the success of attempts to mitigate and control it are all to do with behavior. You know, in a very fundamental way, this is about what people do. It's about what people did. It's about the way they changed what they did. And, you know, if you want to see any stronger proof of the relevance of the behavioral sciences, just look at what happens to curves when you introduce lockdowns, when you ease lockdowns, you know, when people start doing things, when there are big events and people congregate at them, you just look at the data. It tells you that behavior is really important in here. So, of course, the behavioral sciences need to be absolutely central to this. The other point I make in my talk is that, and just to echo what Jamie said, we need not just lots of data on behavior, but we need good theories of human behavior. These are fundamental issues to do with, are people rational? Are they economically rational? Are they following some other kind of rationality? How do they acquire their ideas about what they should do? So, you know, there are really fundamental blue skies issues that are integral to anthropology and the behavioral sciences that we kind of see in this fulcrum of this extraordinary pandemic that's been unfolding. So we really have to integrate with theories of human behavior. Something I say in the talk is that pandemics pose a lot of what social theorists call collective action problems. Okay, so this is where the individual incentives, the thing I might fancy doing from a personal point of view, do not scale up to the socially efficient solution. Just for example, early in a pandemic, when the pandemic is small, I really want everyone else to socially distance to keep the pandemic small, but I myself, it would be kind of nice if I didn't have to bother and I could still go to my favorite restaurant as long as no one else is. But of course, if everyone reasons like that, we're in collective doom. It's a tragedy of the commons. The pandemic gets bigger and we're all worse off. So the fundamental social question of how do humans solve tragedies of the commons, how do they have effective pro-social norms that they manage to uphold, is indeed a central issue in the pandemic. I won't say too much more now for the sake of time. We all tend to assume, and just watch any film ever about a human disaster or pandemic, that everyone will behave terribly. You know, just like we tend to be very pessimistic about humans' ability to provision public goods, we tend to assume everyone is just, it'll be every man and woman for themselves. But in fact, that isn't so. One of the things, you know, has been a very common experience for all of us is lots of people said, I want to do my bit. I want to behave well. I just need clarity about what behaving well constitutes. So actually, people are, you know, it's a miraculous thing about humans, are very capable of evolving pro-social norms that allow us to govern these things. But clearly they have to coordinate on a norm and they have to be clear about what the right norm is, and that is not straightforward. The other thing that can happen is you get an unraveling that the moment people feel that whilst they themselves are following a norm, but others are not, that becomes kind of toxic and very rapidly contagious, no pun intended, in the sense that the moment we think other people are socially loafing or failing to follow the norms tend to unravel. So I think that humans can sustain pro-social norms, and not just by punishment, but by other kinds of informal normative means, and actually are very willing to do so. But on the other hand, the moment there start to be very visible instances of other people not doing their bit, it tends to unravel. So what sort of sanctions do you have? What kind of systems do you have to stop that happening? The final main point I make in my talk is to do with the role of causal understanding. So I think there are two schools of thoughts about human norms. One is that people follow them because we have a very deep human tendency to be normative. We're a very normative creature compared to other kinds of primates, for example. But a second view is that actually people's causal understandings of why they're doing the things they're doing are very, very important. Now, this can work for you in that if you can explain clearly why hand washing is important or vaccination is important, you bring a lot of people with you. If you give mixed messages on that, that's bad. But if you can be clear about it, that you can bring a lot of people with you. On the other hand, there are some things that are just causally very opaque to people. The idea that you sticking a needle in me randomly, which under other circumstances would be a battery, is a way of preventing me from getting sick a year down the line, is very unintuitive to people. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't sort of seem intuitively right at all. So unfortunately, the human tendency to have intuitions about certain kinds of causes being efficacious and appropriate sometimes need to be overcome by the fact that some of the things we need to do in a pandemic, some are intuitive, like, keeping distance from other people, but some are really non-intuitive, like allowing people to stick needles in your arm, which mysteriously put 0.5 mil of a clear fluid that, has no discernible relation to some future disease you might get. So we have to accept that people's intuitive theories of things, their understandings of how things work, can work for us if we can plug into them, and really work against us in terms of resistance and skepticism to certain things we might need to explain to them that they might do. I think those are the main points I make in my talk. So on sufferance of your time, I won't say any more now, but I'm really looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Great, thank you, Daniel. That was really great. Otakwe, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Just give me 1 second to pull up a few slides. And so I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at Human PIP. My name is Otakuye Conroy Ben. I go by Otak. I'm an assistant professor of environmental engineering at Arizona State University. And today I want to highlight just some of the issues that are going on in tribal communities. I myself am a member of the Ogallala Sioux tribe from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And while I'm not, immersed within, the tribal pandemic and goings on at the moment, because I'm located in Tempe, I'm very aware of some of the issues that are going on. I want to give you a status update of what's going on in tribal communities. And this is from the Indian Health Service, which is broken up into different regions across the US. The Indian Health Service provides health care to American Indian tribes. There are 574 federally recognized tribes within 37 states. And as of March 20th, nationwide in tribal communities, there are about approaching 190,000 positive cases. And the areas leading these positive cases include the Oklahoma City area Indian Health Service, the Phoenix area service unit, which covers Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, followed by the Great Plains. And I'm sure you have heard within different press releases that there is a health disparity issue going on when it comes to tribal communities. Tribal members, tribal communities have nearly 2 times the rate of positive cases, 3.7 times the rate of hospitalizations, and deaths are nearly 2.4 times that of white and non-Hispanics. The pandemic has showcased disparities, across many different sectors, including, Wi-Fi access and broadband, water availability. Many, homes within tribal communities just don't even have the ability to wash hands because that infrastructure is not there. Also underlying that are the water quality issue. Within infrastructure, we have housing problems. There's not enough, there's not sufficient housing. We have houses that are providing homes to multi-generational families. Tribal members to a sense, have a lot of underlying health conditions that are leading to increased mortality. There are also disparities, at the beginning of the pandemic, the emergency response, preparedness just wasn't there, the testing wasn't there. But tribes have been very responsive to vaccinations. And that's because, tribes, they are sovereign entities here in the US. They are allowed to enforce their own policies, laws, regulations, even, very different from the state within which they're located. So tribes have gone to great lengths to declare public health emergencies. My own tribe in Pine Ridge, they shut down the borders for a number of times. They weren't allowing non-tribal members in. And tribal members who were leaving, they weren't allowed to come back until the lockdown ended. The Navajo Nation has implemented many curfews, weekend long, week long. Shut down casinos, businesses have been shut down. And just to put something in perspective, so my tribal community, we've only had about 2,000 cases of COVID and about 49 deaths. And if you look at Navajo Nation is about 10 times the size of Pine Ridge, population-wise, living on the reservation, 30,000 cases and about 1,200 deaths. Vaccine distribution, tribes have been very proactive and reactive with vaccine distribution. And in some cases, tribes are prioritizing vaccinations, making sure that the elders and native language speakers are receiving those vaccines first. I think it's because we have been hit so hard with the pandemic, with deaths, family infections. And we have a very, familial society where we're not used to social distancing. We're very much, community oriented. And so it's really important to get back to some type of normalcy. And so moving forward, I just wanted to highlight some of the work that I'm doing is I have a collaborator here at ASU. We're looking at wastewater-based epidemiology to really track, some of these pandemic trends in response to COVID vaccines. So what we're doing is we're collecting wastewater from the community, and we're quantifying coronavirus that's excreted in human waste. And we would like to use this, as a tool because the sewer signature is about 5 to 7 days lead time when it comes to, coronavirus trends. So we can use this to inform tribal communities. Will you see a clinical spike, in about a week, or are levels coming down? So we want to reach as many tribes as we can, but that's also limited by the sewer infrastructure. And so the map on the right shows where, in theory, we can do this type of work in tribal communities. We can only reach about 100 tribal communities with wastewater-based epidemiology. And we're not only going to use this with COVID, we can look at, future pandemics. We can use this with substance abuse, look at, diabetes trends within a tribal community. So with that, I'd like to close. I'd like to thank the National Science Foundation for hosting this workshop. And I'd like to, thank many of my collaborators and, funding from NSF and NIH. I'd like to close with Pilamaya, which is thank you in Lakota.
Okay, Yolanda, you ready to go?
Yes, I am. I'll just share my screen.
Okay. You're not seeing anything yet, can you? Okay, so do you see one PowerPoint slide? James, can you just give me a thumbs up?
Yep, you're good.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, hello everyone. My name is Yowande Oladende, and thank you so much to Nsf for putting this together. And thank you also to Juliet Iwe-Lumo, who's my colleague, for inviting me. Today, I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. So whatever I share today are just my views and my views only. All right, so I'll get started. So I'm going to start with a story that illustrates why it is important to focus on the perceptions that people have and some of the resources available to them and what nurtures them as we prepare for future pandemics. Some of you may be able to resonate with this story, regardless of whatever discipline you're coming from. This story is a story of my dear friend, and her name is Kemi. Kemi was in a situation where she had to decide what to do when she started to have symptoms of COVID. So I'm going to start with Kemi's story. She knew that she had symptoms, but the last thing on Kemi's mind was to go to the hospital. Kemi is a 42-year-old Nigerian immigrant who relocated to the United States when she was 17 to attend college. She has a master's degree and she works in one of the top accounting firms in the country. Kemi lives in my community in Maryland, and she's an active member of the local chapter of the Nigerian Association. Even though Kemi has been living in the US for about 25 years, she's very much rooted in her Nigerian culture. So at the height of the COVID pandemic, a number of Kemi's close friends were diagnosed with COVID. The one that hit close to home for her was when one of her first cousins started showing COVID symptoms and had to be rushed to the hospital emergency room. This cousin ended up dying at the hospital. About 2 weeks later, Kemi started experiencing symptoms herself. The fatigue, flu-like symptoms. At the time she was experiencing these symptoms, she was hearing on the news about how nobody was allowed to accompany their loved ones into the hospital. You literally drop your loved ones to an unknown fate. That was what she told me when she reached out to me. She was like, yeah, one day I am not going to the hospital because my husband is going to drop me and who knows what's going to happen to me. So what did Kemi do? She decided to stay home and have her husband take care of her. Immediately, Kemi placed a phone call to her mother back at home in Nigeria to inform her about her symptoms and to ask for possible herbal remedies she could use. Her mother gave her the names of the medicinal herbs she needed to buy, the specified quantities, and also the preparation instructions. So her husband went to the local African store in Baltimore, which is about 1 hour away from where Kemi lives, to see which of the medicinal herbs was available for purchase. For those that he could not find in the US, her mother shipped it to her by DHL courier service. Kemi told me that she would drink 4 to 8 ounce cupful of medicinal herbs every day for about a month. And then she told me the symptoms abated. Now, prior to this event, Kemi was someone I knew very well. She was not opposed to using any form of Western medicine. However, with the uncertainties in the news on the treatment plan for COVID and the fact that some of the treatment being recommended at the beginning of COVID led to unpleasant and serious side effects, Kemi knew that she would not be going the route of Western medicine for this one, until all the kinks were ironed out. When I spoke to her about possibly seeking care from the hospital as her symptoms got serious, she said to me, "What is the point of going to the hospital and being subjected to trial and error treatment when I can rely on on what my mothers and grandmothers have used for several generations which worked for them?" In her words to me, and I'm going to say this in Nigerian Pidgin English, "When I see, say, water don't pass Gary, I immediately called my mama." What that means is when the situation had almost reached its breaking point, she had to rely on her cultural identity of what had worked for generations before her. So what does Kemi's story teach us about what we can do to prepare for future pandemics? I will use the PEN 3 model, which I'm projecting on the screen. I will use this for unpacking Kemi's story. So PEN 3 was developed by Erembua in 1989 to address public health and health promotion issues that are unique to Africans and African American communities. So when you look at the PEN 3 model, it has 3 domains: the cultural identity, relationships and expectations, and cultural empowerment. And each domain has 3 dimensions in the circle, as you can see in the circle. And each one has an acronym of PEN, and that's where PEN 3 came from. So perception. So what I'm going to highlight 3 points as I think of people like Kemi in our preparation for pandemics, for future pandemics. The first one is perceptions do matter. Cultural perceptions influence how people acknowledge the symptoms they have, how they seek care and treatment as well. We need to pay attention to these perceptions that feed people's beliefs and the broader context where these perceptions emerge from, and also from which they thrive. People's perceptions, be they sociocultural, political, historical, are coming from somewhere. They do not just emerge within a vacuum. The second one is the enablers. We need to pay attention to the resources or the enablers in the form of capital and human resources, and also the institutional support that influence how strictly people adhere to public health prevention messages and treatment protocols. In Kemi's case, all she heard in the news was how loved ones were being dropped off at the hospital entrance to die. So as a result, she had to go back home to explore the core of preventive and curative health practices that were at the roots of our cultural identity, the herbal leaves, which she referred to as agbo. And the third point, the last point, is we need to pay attention to what nurtures the individual within their community, whether it is the family, whether it's the church, or even the social groups they belong to. In Kemi's case, she was being nurtured by her mother back home in Nigeria, even though she was here in the US. The culture of loved ones caring for their sick at home is something that is valued in the African culture. So the power of these nurturers cannot be minimized if we want to get ahead of future pandemics. While human behavior is central to how diseases are transmitted, culture intertwined with history and politics of identity play key roles in understanding people's health beliefs, decisions, and ultimately their health behaviors. The lessons learned from this pandemic has taught us the importance of assessing the role culture plays in has taught us the importance of assessing the role culture plays in influencing the health beliefs and health behaviors of a group of people. In preparing for future pandemics, and I'm wrapping up with this, we need to rethink our approach to better serve people like Kemi by understanding her perceptions within its own cultural context and addressing the sociocultural views and nuances that are unique to her as an individual within her community, the collective community. Kemi would have been better served if we paid attention to her perceptions, the resources she needed, and if we included those things that nurture her. As such, in preparing for future pandemics, we need to take into consideration people like Kemi as we craft public health messages and design interventions that are culturally appropriate and effective. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yewande. Kathleen, you ready to roll?
Okay, hello.
Oh,
so
we're seeing your presenter view.
You're seeing my presenter page. Okay, let me change that. Sorry. Thought I had it.
In there.
Okay. Does that work?
I need to share again.
Sorry, I just lost Zoom for a second. So, okay. All right, you should be good now.
Yep.
Okay, so first off, thank you for having me, and I'm going to try to talk about cultural and identity factors, but from a combined computational social science perspective. Clearly, as the pandemic hit, this became a disinfodemic, as people have talked about. And the point here is not just that there's been more disinformation than ever before, but it's that, in fact, in pandemics in general, what you should expect to see is disinformation changes and spreads with events. All of online life is organized around events that happen in the offline world. But what's happened in these kind of events, particularly large-scale pandemics, is that at-risk groups, minorities, for example, become special targets of the kinds of things that are going on online. Hate speech and disinformation are used to attack the minorities. Governments promote disinformation to strengthen their position and control, and sometimes to the detriment and euthanization of particular subpopulations. While it is important to think about erecting new global policies, it's important to think about new technology in this respect and new global accords. But without those, future pandemics are likely to just be an excuse to breed more civil unrest and to excuse attacks on groups. This is not an AI problem solution. Rather, this is one where we have to begin to think about how and understand how groups form online, how identities become transformed in this environment. In fact, what the pandemic does is it puts you basically in isolation. Your outlets and reach to the rest of the world are often through online mediated sources like social media. Within that, the denizens of social media space, like bots, cyborgs, and trolls, are actually part of your social world. They are part and parcel of the groups that you embed in. And they use a variety of techniques to trick you into thinking your group online is different than what it really is. They use memes, they use increasingly the use of deep fakes, they use doctored videos, and they use something that we've known about since forever, which is subconscious cues, such as cute little pictures of kittens, or the use of pronouns or spelling things in all caps to direct and affect your attention. Bots and cyborgs take on the identities, for example, of individuals, such as government critics, transforming them and making it look like they are supporting the government. China, for example, used this technique quite well to actually reduce the effectiveness of some critics of the Communist Party by using bots to imitate them. And instead having the critics critique the Communist Party, the fake bot critics now then supported the Communist Party and what the Communist Party was doing with respect to the control of the pandemic. In general, people can use these also to form groups online and to build communities. One of the things that these is being done with the use of bots and cyborgs is to link people together so that they form groups. And once they get those groups, to actually transform them over into echo chambers and promote disinformation through them. Oftentimes online, we think of bots as simply being megaphones. They surround a source like a prime comedian or a politician, or even the CDC or the World Health Organization, and simply spread out their message. And in fact, that is dominantly what a lot of them do. However, there are other bots and trolls out there that actually act as brokers and actually link groups together, make it seem that your group is bigger than it is, and pretend that they are your friend. Sometimes they will take over your account and send messages that as though they were from you, even though you don't know it. And that has led to the building of online groups where people, for comfort and joy, they feel like the people within that group care about them and understand them. But in reality, half of those who are being supportive are, of course, not real human beings. If we look at these groups, they become prime targets then for disinformation. And a lot of times we find that disinformation, although it may start on state-sponsored media accounts in various countries, it rapidly moves throughout the world. And it tends to move, once it gets into a country like the United States, a lot of the resending of disinformation is actually by your fellow citizens, your friends, your neighbors, and so on. But the more harmful of the information that is often aimed at particular minority groups, is often coming from these sites promoted by other citizens, but then amplified by bots so that they use them to actually attack groups. And the prime targets in Western Europe and the US have been women, the LGBTQ community, and fundamental Christian groups, getting them to link together and think about things in new ways. The more lethal the information that is being spread, the more it is related to a conspiracy theory, the more lethal the fake news, such as drink chlorine, the more likely you will see to have these not real actors, these trolls and bots, involved in the spreading of that information and getting it out there. Additionally, what we see is happening during disasters in general, and this pandemic in particular, is that bots and so on have been used to find groups of individuals who are disgruntled, who may not know each other, and they use various ways in the different social media platforms to trick those people into following and getting together with each other. And so in effect, as you see here with the red dots, they build communities around these. Many of these were communities of hate. And for example, in the US, starting in early February, they started to link together various people expressing hatred and anger about the pandemic, linking them together and built communities of hate that were anti-Chinese and even anti-Chinese who had been in the US for multiple generations. Now, this is a very cultural phenomena, for example, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Taiwan, where we've looked at similar problems. In fact, we see that the bots are not being used to build communities of hate. Instead, what they're doing there is actually spreading hate about any politician who is not supporting Chinese interests. So how these things play out in terms of whether you build what you build communities online to do and what you get them to do and how you can manipulate them, in part are affected by cultural differences in the group. Cultural differences, of course, impact, therefore, how communities form online. They affect what those communities do and so on. But one of the most egregious things that happens is online is that while attacks in pre-online media were often attacks by looking at viewpoints, in social media, most of the leverage comes from actually being able to bring people into groups, shape their identities, and reshape it. And one of the things that we need to be worried about and think about for the future, in part here, is the fact that many of these cases of building groups and shaping people's identities in the past 12 months have been around the world globally, has been shaping people to have a distrust in science and a distrust in the medical community. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, great. All right, thank you so much, speakers. We're now going to move into the question and answer session. John, do you moderate this, or should I kick it off? What's the?
Jamie, this is Heather. We can read the questions for you if you'd like to moderate follow-up questions, possibly.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll start with the first one. This is for going back to Daniel Nettle, the first one that we heard from. This was answered in the Q&A box. However, if you'd like to follow up with a little bit more, there were some resources that were posted. But Dr. Nettle, can you give the name of the theory about individuals that might only be interested in personal benefits and will overlook the common good or benefit?
Well, thank you very much. That's a big question, and I don't want to take the whole session, but I suppose a very simple version of a rational actor model, as is often used in economics, for example, would suggest that people really care about their personal incentives, and therefore they'll always choose the thing that will give them the most benefit at the least cost to themselves, and not really be concerned about others' outcomes. But I think over the years we've seen that that seems to be inadequate. An extraordinary thing about humans is that they don't just follow personal benefit, or to make a theory work where they do, you have to define personal benefit very broadly, often to include the welfare of other people. So there are things called social preference theories, for example, which is about actually how humans will do things for the common good. The other thing about humans that an economist called Herb Gintis has written about, which I'm interested in, is the idea that people are sort of intuitive Kantians. So the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant said, really the way you ought to behave is that way that if everyone else also did it, would achieve your outcome, or achieve the outcome you would like to see in the world. And actually there's lots of evidence that we do that, right? So people go and vote, even though their vote probably won't make any difference at all to the outcome of the election, but they want to do so because they figure, well, if everyone goes and votes, we'll get a well-informed choice of government. So there's a lot to talk about here, but both moral theories and empirical theories suggest that we're not just motivated by very simple versions of self-interest. I don't know if that's answered your question, but I hope it's been useful.
That's great, Daniel. Thank you. I also included in the Q&A a couple papers that Tim Raluga at Penn State has written on the sort of formal game theory of vaccinations. This idea that getting a vaccine entails a bit of a personal cost. It's best if the entire population pursues it, and so there is some work on that. I suspect there's more recent work too. I'm just familiar with Tim's work on that. So terrific. Should we move on to the next question?
Sure. This is actually also for Dr. Nettle. And I guess they were wondering, it's sort of related to this idea of rational, is the question was, how can we further a culture of accepting uncertainty? That is, as we gather more information, the measures that we take to keep each other safe may change as well. So for instance, it was wearing a mask useful or not in reducing the spread? There was kind of back and forth in the beginning on that. How can we further a culture of making mistakes, learning from them, and trying again better? So that kind of trust. How do we weave that trust?
I think this is a great question, and I don't have a very good answer, but I think it's absolutely on the money because we have a tension. Anyone who's involved in kind of behavioral sciences in this context or in behavior change and communication, there's a tension between the idea that you need to seem like you know what you're saying. You need to say what's right and so on, and that's what makes messages transmissible and credible. But actually, what this pandemic has taught us, it's taught the population about uncertainty and confidence intervals, and actually shifting data about what we should be doing. And so, really, I think it's a tremendously difficult job to both to hold the right line between being honest and open about the uncertainties, right, and things like the precautionary principle that we don't really know how bad things would get, but we need to orient towards the worst plausible scenario, and then trying to give people clear messages they understand, and that I just think that's a desperately difficult balance. And I'd love to actually hear other people's views on what's the right balance between sort of airing our dirty linen in public as scientists, which I believe we should do, right? We should air the differences of opinion and the wide confidence intervals on all these models, and actually saying to people, we don't disagree on this, we need to socially distance. So I think there's a real tension there. And actually, sometimes you can be damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you don't admit your uncertainty, it seems like it's a conspiracy and you're covering up. If you do admit it, people say, well, even the experts can't agree amongst themselves. So, that's a very, very difficult tension. Maybe we'll get to talk about that later. I hope so.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I think that this is a pretty wide open research area in terms of, we have this problem within science, right, is the best method for communicating uncertainty. I personally suspect that a big part of the answer is about openness and transparency. And there are ways to talk about uncertainty and sort of disagreements among practicing scientists and practitioners and whatever that honestly communicates uncertainty, but doesn't leave people with a feeling that no one knows. I mean, we can emphasize our commonality, the thing that, and this is getting at the precautionary principle to a degree, right? When you and I disagree about the particulars of an explanation for human behavior or the efficacy of some sort of outcome, we can emphasize the core of the things that we agree about while saying we are concerned about some specifics on the details, and I think that we don't very often communicate the precautionary principle as a sensible sort of default to take. I'd love to hear some other takes on this. It's so important.
Hey, James, I don't know if that was a call for, okay, I just wanted to quickly chime in on that. I think it's very important to be transparent with people, because transparency does breed trust. And when I think about communities that have been disenfranchised for a very long time, when it comes to just even with the pandemic, they just wanted to know what was going on. Even if researchers were unclear about the path or the way forward, they just wanted to know what's going on, and not wear masks today, don't wear masks tomorrow, and all the uncertainties that accompanied the whole COVID pandemic.
So I'm going to add a few things that we saw, and that is that not only do you have to speak in a very clear-cut way, you also have to build a community around you prior to a pandemic and maintain it and establish the trust relationships before the pandemic even starts, in order for people to go to you, listen to you, and so on. And you have to frame your messages by working with local stakeholders in ways the people in each community will understand. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Anybody else want to add to this topic? I feel like there's a lot more to be said here.
We are running out of time, James, and we got still a few more questions.
Okay, all right.
So maybe we can put some of that in the breakout group too.
Yep.
Our next question is for Dr. Conroy Ben. Can you kindly share some more of the positives within the tribal culture that have helped with the success of the COVID-19 vaccine uptake?
I can comment maybe on a couple additional positives, but again, the social attitudes and why it's so accepted is not really my area. The Indian Health Service did make vaccines widely available. I would say first off that vaccine availability contributed to acceptance of the vaccine. And to the point where tribal communities are allowing non-tribal members to get vaccines because right now in some areas it is in excess. I think that tribal members also want to, preserve culture. This is really impacting our tribal elders. Many of the tribal elders that are dying are some of the last people fluent in their language and know the customs. And so, it's up to the younger generations to help save that. And then I would also say that just recognizing that, many of these places are in remote areas. Some of the health clinics are not adequately resourced. Tribal members had to be flown out to Denver, to Phoenix to receive the appropriate care. And so we're also recognizing that, this is more of a proactive responsibility that we can do for our communities.
Thank you. There was one other follow-up for you, which was, can you expand on the ways that underlying food insecurity and water insecurity affect behavioral strategies, decision-making, trajectories, and outcomes?
Yeah, so as I stated before, tribal members, tribal governments, we've known about these, water, food insecurities, and the pandemic just, brought it to front and center. And so with that, how that has affected behavioral strategies, I would say, at the tribal level, now's the time to take care of our infrastructure. With the COVID CARES Act money, additional funding coming in. And I think that's, trickling back down into the communities, how can we be more prepared as individuals? What can we do to help out our neighbors, to, start growing our own food? I've seen that happening in our tribal communities. So it's affecting all levels of the tribal governments, from policy making down to the individuals. We can discuss more during the breakout session.
Okay, thank you. This next question is for Dr. Oladeyinde. They really appreciated your story about Kemi, and they were curious as if you could kindly share more on how we can identify the positives and opportunities within communities, diverse cultures, that can be leveraged for pandemic preparedness.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. So I think the only way we can, I think the way we can leverage this is, one second. Sorry, the joys of having a kid at home schooling. Okay, so I think, we need to go into the community and talk to them, not from an ethnocentric stance that my culture is more superior than yours, but from the stance of, I'm here to learn. I'm here in your community to learn. So, that's when you can really know what's working within that community. When you go with that mindset of, I'm here to learn from you, you all are the experts. That's when you can really understand what's going on, what's working in that community, within those cultures. You will also learn when you go into the community that, there are some things that are unique within that culture that has worked for them for years, several generations, such as in chemistry, like using medicinal herbs, for example. It had worked, like when all chips are down, they may turn to resort to using medicinal herbs. You can only learn that when you go into the community and you try to learn from them. And just as Dr. Conroy Conroy Ben spoke about. She spoke about how Native Americans were initially opposed to social distancing because, it's a very community-oriented culture. So the only way you can identify the positives and the opportunities within communities and diverse cultures is by going into those communities with the mindset of, I am here to learn from you all because you all are the experts. Thank you.
That's thank you. I would like to follow. This is for me, firstly, but and kind of when I think of that, and I think of Dr. Carly, the idea of what we mean by community isn't as spatially bound, perhaps, as maybe we've historically thought. Especially with the internet and the media. So when we think about the extensive diversity that when you talk about these sort of cultural differences and the ability for organizations to target them or engage with them, I guess I'm curious about if anyone has ideas about how that might be done moving forward, because that seems very complicated. And I meant that generally to everyone.
So generally, so given that a lot of the new communities cross boundaries between, states, countries, etc. What we found effective, and this is something that needs a lot more study, is that you need to have two lines of communication and two lines of trying to change who is talking to them. One that is aimed at the broader global community, and one that is aimed very locally. Because even though there aren't traditional boundaries in a lot of stuff online now, because you can talk to anybody anywhere in the world, it's still the case that growth in the discussion topics is very much driven by what is happening locally. So every time there's an event, a local event, okay, such as the governor puts out a new mandate on wearing face masks or whatever, you see an immediate upsurge in response from that. And then you have the global players come in and say, but overall, or in my country or whatever, and you need to respond to the global ones and saying, yes, but what you're saying is irrelevant in this particular context. So you need both a local and a global response at the same time.
I'll chime in on that quickly as well. And I agree with what the previous speakers just said. The thing is, when I think of a global, right, we're living in this global space, but I think we always have to remember that when we say something is global, the local is a part of the globe, right? And that's what the local is within the global. So when I think of how do we define communities, when a community is really not just based on your geography, it's really based on, it's not bound by geographical boundaries. So we have to create spaces where we can ask questions, we can learn from people, we can think about the global within the local, and seeing how the lessons learned from the local meaning whatever you define that community to be, how the lessons learned from the local can also be translated to, on a larger scale, to the global. I think that's how I kind of think about it when I'm thinking about communities and what constitutes a community, because, you could be, well, let me just leave it at that. I don't want to go into too much. Thank you.
No, it's a great response. And the next set of questions, we've got about 5 more. Are general for everyone. But so one, for instance, was some research suggests that complying with public health recommendations is less about ineffective messaging or reasoning, but differences in philosophical beliefs. How do we appeal to people's different philosophical beliefs? For example, how do we appeal to both libertarians and interventionists about government action when it comes to government restrictions, mandates, et cetera? And these can obviously be interwoven in between different cultural contexts as well.
So what we've seen is that that when you think about compliance with anything, whether we were looking at face masks or at vaccination, it's almost like think of it as circles within circles within circles of compliance, right? And there are groups out there that no matter how effective your messaging, no matter how brilliant it is, et cetera, they are never going to comply because, you know, they've already decided based on other factors, whether it's religious or political or whatever, just not to comply. But then there's this big group who might comply, but they're not going to pay attention to the logic of it. They're going to pay attention to the to the beliefs and values that get invoked by that logic. So for example, there's a huge anti-vaccination group in the US. Some of them legitimate reasons that they're not going to get vaccinated no matter what. But there's another group that are kind of teetering between yes, vaccination, no, but they have been recruited with political messaging, et cetera, to make them think about vaccination in terms of my body, my right. And so as a result, they don't want to get vaccinated. And no matter how effective your messaging, they have been already recruited by the people promoting a non-vaccination strategy. So you have to look at not just how effective your messaging is, but what are the counter messages? And what is the argument that is being set up, and address the argument, not just being, you know, direct in why you should do something.
Can I also add, sorry to butt in, but that I think that the sort of ideological differences between people are sometimes overstated, and that there's lots of evidence that people are actually pretty plastic in their beliefs. I know that sometimes looking at the more intolerant kind of communications that go around, that might not be very obvious, but actually people's beliefs are pretty situationally malleable. So lots of things that were politically impossible, for example, immediately before World War II in this country, the UK, everyone agreed with once World War II had come along. Lots of things that were ideologically completely impossible, like nationalization of industries and government support for various industries, even 2 years ago in this country, have all happened, and nobody's disagreed with them in any serious way. So I think when there are big situational drivers, as we're seeing now, let's not underestimate how, you know, there are no libertarians in foxholes. And I think, you know, that's an expression that we use here. And I think that there's some truth in that, if people understand the nature of the situational determinants, then a surprising number of them actually can modify their views, and the ideological differences you might imagine can become less marked, is my guess.
I think that's a really interesting perspective, and I'll just throw in some stuff that we've been thinking about. Pulse Moldino, Christina Moya, myself, and a group of other people. One of the, I think a really important question is, when faced with uncertainty, how do people gather information, and how do they make their choices? I suspect, and there's some evidence that supports this, that different types of learning heuristics and decision-making heuristics kick in under extreme uncertainty. I think a pandemic is a canonical case of systematic uncertainty. You have the intrinsic uncertainty of the pathogen. You have the uncertainty that's being thrown out into the information ecosystem by people who are actually trying to muddy the water. And the question is, how do people respond and make their decisions? Do they engage, for example, in conformist bias, or do they go for something like a status bias to their learning behavior? And we need to know the answer to these questions, and that will help us with, you know, sort of taking advantage of the plasticity that Daniel is talking about. You know, so if there's a prestige bias that kicks in, we have to find, you know, prestigious actors who are going to actually promote the right kind of messaging that we want to see. And one of the things that I was really struck by with the way the pandemic has played out, particularly in the United States, is it seemed like there was a moment where people hadn't made up their minds, and then suddenly, you know, we get this polarization into these existing cultural groups, and then this starts to create its own its own dynamics and its own feedbacks with the transmission dynamics and the public health interventions. Understanding the way people respond to crises and uncertainties and what their decision-making algorithms are, I think is a really important step forward for understanding how to improve, sort of pro-social outcomes.